So, like Sid said, contrary to popular belief, the emotional aspect of disease, it's not really new. That there's really a lot of research, even though she didn't want me to get all geeked out like I usually do with research. We do have some studies that we just wanted to share, not necessarily go really in depth, but also reflect on how really the emotional part of any disease, really acute or chronic, has been around for a long, long time. So, just to refresh your memory a little bit about a few Greek dudes that you might have heard of. Plato, all these guys were around 2,000 years ago, and they were talking about the relationship between the body, mind, and the spirit. And I think, even though Plato is regarded more as a philosopher, there's actually a lot of links between kind of his school of thought becoming really more of medicine in his time. I really thought that this quote by Plato was kind of interesting, that really what he's saying is you can't treat one part of the body without the other. You can't treat the eyes without the heads without the eyes. And so I think that is a premise of what naturopathic medicine is founded on, and Chinese medicine, and all of the traditional medicines. And somewhere it just got a little lost in the shuffle. So Hippocrates also is known as the father of medicine, and I learned something in doing a little research. I'd never heard of this crisis point, and I think it's really interesting in chronic disease because we as practitioners see this a lot, where there is a shift and people all of a sudden, there's a time where they actually can make a conscious choice of when they can get better, or unfortunately if they don't get better. And so what Kirsten and I are hoping to do, and everybody else in the lecture series to follow, is really help empower everyone to realize that we have this own healing ability right in our bodies. We just need to sometimes nudge it in the right direction. So in more recent times, Cancer is a Turning Point was written by Lawrence Lachon, and he discovered the emotional link between between a patient's history and cancer specifically. But really this can be applied to any chronic disease. And like I said, thousands of years ago, we kind of, knew that that was really the only thing they had to rely on. But as recent as less than 100 years ago, this was still a common practice, that a doctor would ask a patient, what's going on? What led up to this disease that you now have? And then the Emperor of Maladies, if you haven't seen, there's actually a PBS documentary based on this book that's really remarkable. If you haven't seen it and you have the chance to see it, it is basically a historical biography of the treatment of cancer written by an oncologist. So it's really pretty profound.
So as Dr. Stacy was stating, it's really important for us to check in with not only our patients but with ourselves regarding our emotional landscape and what's going on, because so much of that guides who we are. And also, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately, some of the diseases that we develop. And cancer, that book is such a telltale title because it can either be a turning point in a great way or in a not so great way. So the most important thing I think for us to start with is talking about emotions. And I think that we use this term so many times, but we forget what it really means. But they're instincts that we have. We're animals just like all the other animals out there. And so when we feel something, it's for a reason. It's usually guided by some historical insight that we had in the past. So when we feel something, it's really important for us to pay attention to that because it's telling us something, instead of just going with it and just taking it as it is and moving on to the next thing, but really starting to listen to what our mind and our body are telling us together. So again, it's an instinctive state of mind deriving from our own circumstances, mood, or relationship with others. And you'll see that others absolutely guide and influence our relationships as we move forward in this talk. So again, the purpose of emotions do have a purpose. They play an important role in how we think and behave. And in order to truly understand emotions, it's really important that we understand the different phases of our emotional experiences. So the first one is the subjective component, how we ourselves are experiencing the emotion. The second is how our bodies react, because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the moment we forget our bodies are reacting to what's happening, not just our brains. And then, of course, how we behave in response to the emotion, and that's our responsibility. So that's why it's really important for us to pay attention to all of these cues and clues from our minds and our bodies. So in conclusion, these different elements can play a role in the function and purpose of our emotional responses, which leads to health and also disease. So the science of happiness and why complaining is literally killing you. And again, this is part of the emotional landscape here. So there's more to this than we may think. So, when we complain a lot, we may just think, oh, it feels good to complain and it's catharsis. And sometimes it is. But there's other times where we need to be careful that we don't get into this consistent loop because it will become a pattern. So this is a really cool thing that I just love learning about. And it seems so almost duh, but when you put it into a scientific paradigm, it makes a lot of sense. So basically, every time we think about something, we have synapses in our brain that that control neurotransmitters and thoughts that fire. So every time we think something, these synapses fire these chemicals back and forth to create thoughts. Just like evolution, our brains are always adapting. So if we're thinking in the same way all the time, those synapses are going to continue to grow closer and closer together. So if we're constantly thinking in a negative light, guess what happens? All of those synapses that are associated with negative thoughts get closer and closer together. So when we're faced with experiences that may not be necessarily positive, we may be more prone to think negatively. The same thing with positive thoughts. So basically, the brain is rewiring its own circuitry. This can be daily, from moment to moment, physically changing itself to make it easier and more likely that the proper synapses will share the chemical link and thus spark together. In essence, making it easier for the thought to trigger. It's just like anything else in our environment, we're constantly evolving and moving to the easier path. So this is the first scientific evidence that your thoughts reshape your brain, and thus we are changing our construct of reality. So let that sink in for a moment. I'm sure all of you guys have heard the adage that we create our own reality, and this is kind of turning out to be the truth. So let us be sure that what we are creating is where we spiritually, mentally, and physically want to live.
So the shortest path wins the race. It's not necessarily whether we want to be the tortoise or the hare. It's not the fastest, but it's the shortest path. And so, like Kirsten said, with repetition, we are actually creating a shorter pathway in the circuitry in our brain and nervous system. And so the more that we think certain thoughts, that it's actually easier to keep thinking those thoughts. So we're kind of rewiring things and making those synapses actually closer together. That's why I love that picture that was just up, because I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, and it shows actually 2 neurons with the pathway in between. Oh, so here's a little picture for you. The bunny and the tortoise, we're not really concerned about the fast one winning, but which one is the longest or the shortest. So along with that, we kind of have a choice of which pathway are we going to go down. And so there's acceptance versus regret, drift versus desire, love versus fear. Anytime we have a thought or a decision, we have a chance to react. And so that's what I love about the empowerment of how much control we actually have over the mind-body connection. So if you think about it, whenever we have these choices, we can choose love or fear, we can choose acceptance or regret, and we can choose drift or desire. So then you might think, okay, well, I'm just always going to just love all the time, love everything, and it's always good, and be positive. But there's a difference between just saying that. That's a great start. if you find yourself continually thinking negatively, that, if you just start saying it out loud, that's a great start. But we don't live in a simple world. Our world is kind of chaotic. And so it's not quite as simple as that. But yet, it's a great start. So if you focus on that, then you're going to notice that the universe does kind of change around you. So, like I said, the best way to kind of start this process is to practice acceptance, that kind of going with the flow. I learned this actually even taking skiing lessons, that my ski instructor was like, you just need to go with it when you feel like you want to resist. And I'm like, wow, is this a ski lesson or a life lesson? But I think, just kind of going with it. We've all heard this, but it's just a friendly reminder that there actually is science behind it too.
Is that me? Okay. So, like Dr. Stacy was saying, if we work this way, then we'll eventually change. We change the way we think, and in doing so, we change the way we're experiencing the world around us. So the more we practice this, the more we fire those synapses associated with happiness, or vice versa, sadness, regret, pessimism, fear, desire, melancholy, etc. These are all of the synapses that give a reaction and stimulate thoughts and form our personality. So sometimes I'm sure you guys have been around people who are just, magnetic. They make everybody want to be around them. And they have really practiced these synapses where they're constantly thinking in a positive light, and they do draw people to them because it's that positive energy that we all want to feel. So one of the other ways to go with the flow, besides skiing or trying to ski, is the practice of yoga, meditation, and journaling. They all come into play, and we'll hit on all of those a little bit more later as we move forward with this. These are two pictures that I think are great to really reflect maybe the way we should look at this. I think nature has a lot to teach us, and I think if we could all grow a little bit like a tree, a tree is constantly evolving to match what's going on in its environment and to become the best it can be and the tallest tree and get the most light. So that's one way to look at it. And then a river, going with the flow. It just kind of forms to whatever's around it and tries to, instead of going against resistance, go with the resistance, go where it needs to go. But at the same time, grounding down and forming rocks. And that tells you a lot about a river. So the mirror neurons, this is a really, really cool thing, and I love this for us as human beings. And yes, I do not say H when I say human. I've worked really hard on that. But mirror neurons, this is a unique capacity for us as people. So we have a very unique capacity or capability as human beings, and that is that we have imagination. We can picture things that haven't already happened yet. So this is the root of all of our art, our architecture, of the fictional stories or stories, real stories, who knows, that form the religions that now control the lives of billions of people. Imagination lets us live in the past and in the future. And by escaping the present moment, we can use our memories of the past to predict what will happen in the future. So if we think that we were near a dragon in the past, then we should probably be nice to him because he breathes fire and could potentially hurt us. So there's imagination, So it is also this ability that allows us to navigate the complexity of our society and to be human beings with each other. And this is a really important thing. And I think that this is so important, especially now in our time, because we're so attached to our computers and to text messaging and to all of these things that take us farther and farther away from being near each other and having these social cues and mirroring each other. So this is where I was going. This is how it works when we are with others. So when we see someone experience an emotion, be it anger, sadness, happiness, our brain automatically tries to live that emotion too, so that we can imagine what the other person is going through. This is emotional intelligence. So for those of us who are really able to feel what someone else is feeling when they're feeling it, really creates a stronger bond between two people. By doing so, the brain attempts to fire the same synapses. So we're really almost in some ways feeling the same emotion that that person is feeling. This is what empathy is. This is also so important because this means that we have to surround ourselves with positive energy and positive people. So even though, and I know I've done this in the past, you go to the bar with your friends at night and people are talking about or bitching about work, you know, and everything that happened during the day or all these bad things that occurred, and you're like, yeah, that's horrible. So you're constantly implementing that same train of thought about not being happy with something. Well, your brain and your cells pick up on that. So that's why catharsis is good. It's good to complain sometimes about things that bother you, but at the same time, it's also really important that we're surrounding ourselves by things that make us happy. So it's the same thing that happens with the mob mentality. You know, you'll have all of these people that normally wouldn't be violent, but the second they're surrounded by all of those people with that same anger and emotion, people who would never see themselves doing it are automatically doing it all of a sudden. It's the same thing at a music festival. You know, people who are totally blissed out. And it doesn't always have to be because they're high on pot or whatever. It's because they're around people that are really feeling this emotion of comfort, of at peace and solidarity with the fellow human beings that are around them. So again, it's important to hang out or make the energy around yourself positive. So in the end, it's not all BS when you're with your friends at a bar. It's life, it's chaos, and we have the ability to choose how we respond. And that's truly what it's about. So focus on those happy people who will rewire your brain towards love and not towards fear.
So what does this all mean from a physiologic perspective? Do thoughts, our reality, and those who surround us promote disease? We all know that stress can eventually kill us. And the thing about negativity, of regretting, attachment to desires, and of pointless complaining about things that are really not going to be around. You know, we complain, we all tend to find ourselves complaining about things, and when you step back and think, is this really going to matter in a year, in 5 years, and in even a month? Time continues to move forward. And so if we, in that moment where we can make a choice between thinking positive or thinking negative, it could have a greater impact because time just keeps going by. So just to reiterate, stress is really our own inherent, which we now know is changeable. So that's the empowering part of it, response to external stimuli. Oops. So the healthy view of stress is that no one can really live without experiencing some degree of stress. So don't let the thought of, oh my gosh, I have a lot of stress going on, now I'm going to get a disease. You know, it's like, don't let that, you know, get you caught up in it. So there's a lot of things that our body can perceive as stress that are actually really joyful events on a whole scale of things. And so Hans Selye is kind of a naturopathic guru in that he basically was the one that figured out how much the adrenal glands were involved in the stress response, and that the adrenal glands really biochemically can't tell the difference between good stress and bad stress. So again, you know, even when we're getting married, having a baby, moving into a new house, all these things are good, but you still want to keep in mind that they are stressful on the body. So again, stress itself should not be viewed in just a negative context, because it's not the stressor itself that it determines the response, it's your own internal reaction. And actually, it varies from person to person, because one person might get an adrenaline rush and really thrive on what another person would be like, you wouldn't catch me dead doing that. So this is just relating to the social readjustment scale. You've probably already seen that. Like the list of things that I mentioned before, they're actually, some of them are joyous occasions, maybe not a jail term, but, you know, marriage is high up there. And then I thought it was interesting that a marriage reconciliation was, you know, actually as high as retirement. So just keeping that in mind, that it isn't just bad events or what we might perceive as something that's negative, that it still is, our adrenal glands are still kind of a little stressed out. So why is the bad form of stress something that can cause disease? Because, like we said before, the firing of these synapses when we have anger are going to have an impact on the immune system. And so when the immune system is weaker, we're more prone to disease. We're more prone to the heart being weaker. All hormones aren't going to work as well. And this kind of goes back to like even our sugar stress sex talk from a few years ago. And all of our talks are recorded, so you can go to our website where we talked a lot more in depth about the adrenal glands. But cortisol, you may have heard that, you know, it kind of gets a bad rap, but when it's not managed is when it actually is harmful. We do need cortisol to actually combat inflammation, so it's having that right balance of cortisol.
So the outcome of chronic stress responses. I'm sure that we've all experienced times where we have a lot on our plate or we have a lot going on, and all of a sudden after we feel like we've been so on it for so long just trying to get through it that when we get done, we kind of just are totally exhausted. And that's the stress response, and that's what happens. And when that happens over time, I think what so many of us forget in our society is that a lot of us are under this chronic stress. And so it's not this acute thing that's happening right away, like it should have been when we were running from a tiger or a bear, but now it's happening all the time, and now we're sitting at our desk and stressing daily about things. So prolonged stress places tremendous load on many organ systems, especially the heart, blood vessels, adrenals, nervous system, digestive, and immune system. And that can lead to disease in the future. Now, the thing to remember about stress, you guys, is that the reason we had that stress response in the past was because, like I said, we were going to run from a tiger or a bear or some huge animal. I mean, it served a purpose. It got our blood sugar going. It got our immune system down so we weren't having that acute immune reaction like a fever or malaise or anything, so we could really get our behinds out of the way. Well, that's not happening anymore. So we're causing all of this stress on our body. We're circulating all this blood glucose. And we are just, like I said, just sitting and not doing what we might have done in the past with the acute stress response. And now that stress response is becoming a chronic thing instead of something that just happens once and then goes away. With that, over time, when our body is under that much pressure and load, it does cause disease because you're really imbalancing what should be a balanced system. So Stacy and I just thought, well, let's look at cortisol and stress on PubMed, which is the basic medical database where doctors find a lot of research about things. And the second you put in cortisol, and you can put cortisol, stress, and almost anything, and you're going to find research studies. And that says a lot. So we're finding the medical community is finding a lot more out about the effect stress has on our body and also other symptoms. And these are all newer studies, which was a really cool thing to see, because sometimes you can look into PubMed and you'll find a study from like 1950 and you're like, well, but these were all from 2000 and past. So this one's 2011 about stress and memory. I'm sure Stacy and I and all of you have noticed this, that when you're really nervous about something or stressed, you can't remember things as easily. And I almost failed a test because of that, because I was so nervous that I couldn't pull out the answers. So that's just a direct example of that. Stress and the allergic response. This is actually showing that people who are very stressed have more of a risk for having urticaria or rash-like symptoms. So that's something we can ask our patients too, and that we do ask our patients with allergic responses what's going on in a day-to-day basis as far as emotional response to your external environment. Cortisol and female reproductive diseases, you'll find all types of, whether it be endometriosis or fibroids or delayed periods, this all affects our hormonal axis. And then stress and cancer, it's a huge one. And we're going to go into a study in just a couple of slides that's really big on that. But here's another one about tumor progressive and stress. So this is a really cool study, and this is one that's very new that just came out. But this is, and I don't even know if I can say this correctly, eudaimonic, I think it's eudaimonic well-being and tumor norepi in patients with epithelial ovarian cancer. Eudaimonic is a new term they're using in research now, and basically what this means is self-realization. They're actually able to study this now. And what they found is that people who are more self-realized and very in tune and happy with the direction their life is taking, if they're doing something that they enjoy every day, they have less of a risk of getting cancer, and also less of a risk of progression of cancer. Because what they found is that on ovarian cancer cells, there are actually norepinephrine receptors, which are receptors that are signaled when we're under a stress response, because norepinephrine is a stress hormone. So this is just going to show that what we do day to day and how we live our lives really affects something as severe as cancer in our lives. This is also just a really nice diagram from the study showing that, they've discovered now that beta blockers, because it really decreases our physiological response to stress, can actually decrease ovarian cancer and progression as well. So, but if you look here, all of this, all of these things play into tumor growth with norepinephrine receptors specifically.
And the research goes on and on and on, but we're not going to go on and on with it. So what can we do about it? The bottom line is, like I said before, the universe is not simple. It's full of chaos. There's unpreventable circumstances, weather, car accidents, things that happen at work that we just have no control over. But every moment holds that choice where we can go down the short path if that's what we're training our brain to think about, well, what else is going to go wrong, and that continual thought process. Or can we go down the blissful, soul-searching, I'm going to make a change and I'm going to be mindful. And really, it's just about awareness and choosing love over fear. It sounds so simple, but yet I think all of us can probably relate to just falling into that fear pattern that is so common and so easy to catch ourselves into. So what can we do to actually nurture this mindfulness and love? There are negative coping patterns, obviously using drugs and alcohol and smoking, overeating, or undereating, and I think probably Julie and Andrea are going to maybe touch on that associated with cravings, food cravings, using television to kind of numb out, emotional outbursts, feeling of helplessness, overspending, overexercising, just other excessive behaviors. So all of us can probably relate to using some of these, but what are some of the positive therapeutic approaches that we can do? Well, I just listed some things that we use all the time as naturopathic doctors, as Chinese medicine practitioners, as functional medicine doctors, where we're kind of stepping outside the box. Maybe somebody needs a beta blocker if their blood pressure's high and they also have ovarian cancer, or maybe we're trying to prevent a chronic disease, and there's a lot of tools in our toolbox that we can use to help that. One of my favorites are herbal medicines, adaptogens, and nervines especially, because we're talking about the nervous system and the stress response, but helping our body's ability to deal with stress, because again, there's still always going to be things that we can't control. And some of these things on the list will actually help if you know that stress is going to continue, you've got something going on that just you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. These can kind of help bring you back in so that you can start a meditation practice, so that you can create mindful awareness around, because sometimes we're in the moment and we can't even think about how am I going to stop to meditate or do yoga or something else that would help switch those synapses. So just to go through the list, I was actually going to bring some essential oils so everybody could be smelling them, maybe towards the end of the talk, so I wouldn't put you to sleep with lavender, but I forgot them. So yoga, qigong, forest bathing. Who's heard of forest bathing here? Couple people? So I know it sounds kind of weird, like we're going to all run around naked in the forest, but luckily we live. I mean, you could, that's what brings you joy. But really, it's about just being in nature And, it doesn't have to be a forest. It can be, wherever in nature. But the cleanliness of the air, taking off your shoes and walking in your yard can be a form of forest bathing if you don't have time to go for a walk in the forest. But that's one of the things that is nice about living in Durango. We're all very lucky that we actually live in nature. We don't have to travel to get to nature. So, just think about some of these simple things like, just walking on your favorite trail for even 5 minutes, or if you don't have time, just take off your shoes and run barefoot in your yard. So there was a study in the New York Times that actually was used to prove that there is a difference between meditation actually on brain scans and relaxation. And so I thought it was really a great point because, how many times do we think, if we're at home like stretching and kind of chilling out and maybe watching TV or talking on the phone, that, we think that's relaxing, which it's a great thing to do. It's a step in the right direction. But when they did this study, and there's a link too if anybody wants to actually read it, they did brain scans, I think an MRI, they didn't really say, but I'm thinking it was probably some kind of metabolic PET scan or MRI where they could actually look at the patterns of people's brains after they taught them mindful meditation at a retreat. And then the other group was basically just stretching and kind of chatting amongst themselves and joking and things like that. So there was actually a difference in their labs, in their white blood counts, and in their brain scans. So I guess I'm one of those people that I've had trouble sticking to a meditation practice. So this is just another emphasis that it really does make a difference. So really, in conclusion, this isn't about like placing blame that, oh my gosh, we're going to create disease if we don't change. It's about awareness, and about awareness that really is empowering, that each and every day, every moment of the day, that we can make choices that could really change our pathways in life and our synapses in our brain.
Yes, yeah. And also the meditation piece too, and I think that Michelle will probably talk about this, but like we talked about the synapses, the more you do it, the easier it gets. So it's a pain in the butt to sit there for 5 minutes, but trust me, the more you do it, you'll get to like 15 or 20 minutes and you can't even believe that you've sat there that long. So that's something. But yeah, this really is about acceptance, just an awareness, just like Stacy said. And I think that the thing that I also really, that we want you guys to know is that it's really easy to judge ourselves when we have a bad reaction or we think poorly about something. I remember I've read all these self-help books, and then I always end up feeling worse at the end because I'm like, well, damn it, I'm not doing any of that. But I think the most important thing is for us to just really accept, and Buddhism, I mean, this is not a presentation about Buddhism, but they do have a lot to teach about just simple acceptance of what is going on in our lives and coming at things with as much love as we can with the knowledge that the universe is chaotic and we can't always control everything. But we can start to control our perspective of the world around us. So yeah, I think that's it. Anything else? Okay.
Thanks for coming, guys, and hanging out with us.